They put me on the floor. I don't mean a low chair or a bad table near the kitchen. I mean literally on my knees, crawling under the head table like a pest control worker, surrounded by $50,000 worth of imported silk flowers. My sister Kendra was 3 feet above me, standing on a custom-built stage, practicing the speech that would launch her political campaign. The speech I wrote. My mother, Cynthia, walked by and nudged my leg with the toe of her designer heel. Not a kick. Just a reminder. Check the cables. Audrey, we can't have the translation system fail tomorrow. The Japanese investors need to hear every word of your sister's brilliance. I looked up from the dust and tangled wires. Kendra was glowing under the test lights. Perfect. Poised. The golden child about to ascend. I was the dirt beneath her pedestal. Technical support. That was my title for the weekend. Not sister. Not maid of honor. Just the help. Have you ever been the one doing all the work while someone else takes all the credit? Tell me your story in the comments. 3 days earlier, I wasn't on my knees. I was standing in my father's study, staring at a document that felt heavier than a death sentence. The leather chair creaked as my father, Marshall, leaned back, his eyes scanning me with the same detached assessment he used for a declining stock graph. My mother, Cynthia, stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the afternoon sun. On the mahogany desk between us sat a single sheaf of papers. Bold letters at the top read, "Confidentiality and Intellectual Property Assignment. It's just a formality." Audrey, Marshall said, his voice smooth, devoid of warmth. We need to secure the asset before the wedding. Sterling's family is old money. They do their due diligence. We can't have any ambiguity about the authorship of The Architecture of Tomorrow. The Architecture of Tomorrow. The book that had spent 40 weeks on the bestseller list. The book that positioned my sister Kendra as the voice of a new political generation. The book I wrote in a fever dream of caffeine and isolation over 6 months. While Kendra was partying in Ibiza, they wanted me to sign away my rights. Again. But this time, it was permanent. A lifetime gag order. I wrote every word. I said. My voice, quiet but steady. Kendra hasn't even read the final chapter. Cynthia turned from the window. Does it matter Kendra is the brand? Audrey, you know how this works. You have the mind, but she has the face, the charisma, the marketability. You. There it was. The family doctrine I'd been fed since kindergarten. Psychologists call it the dynamic of the golden child and the servant child. It's a form of intellectual cannibalism. They didn't just favor Kendra. They consumed me to feed her. They spent 20 years convincing me that my intellect was a utility. Like electricity or running water essential. Yes, but meant to run in the background. Unseen. While the chandelier got all the admiration. They groomed me to believe that my anonymity was the price I had to pay for being part of this family. I was the engine. Kendra was the paint job. And nobody thanks the engine until it stops working. I won't sign it, I said. Marshall didn't yell. He didn't even frown. He just opened a folder on his desk and slid a glossy brochure across the wood. It was for the violently expensive memory care facility in Arizona, where my grandmother, the only person who had ever brushed my hair or read me a story, was living. The monthly fees are increasing, Marshall said, tapping the paper. $22,000 a month. We're happy to cover it. Of course, as long as the family remains united. But if there's a rupture, if our income streams are threatened by scandal, Well, the state facility down the road is much more affordable. I hear they have a bed open in the general ward. The air left the room. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a hostage situation. They were holding an 80-year-old woman with dementia as leverage for my silence. I looked at my mother. She just checked her watch. Bored by the transaction. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Something cold and hard clicked into place inside my chest. Like a bolt sliding home. I picked up the pen. I signed the document. But as the ink dried, I wasn't thinking about surrender. I was thinking about the fine print they hadn't bothered to read in the original contract I'd drafted 5 years ago. I realized then that love wasn't the currency of this family. Power was, and I was about to change the exchange rate. The wedding day arrived with the kind of aggressive perfection that costs $700,000 to manufacture. The Atherton estate had been transformed into a fortress of white roses and crystal. Drones buzzed overhead like angry hornets, capturing cinematic angles for the global live stream that would introduce Kendra's brand to the world. I was stationed in the tech booth. A suffocatingly small black tent erected behind a wall of hydrangeas. I was effectively erased from the landscape, hidden from the cameras, hidden from the guests, hidden from the history books my family was trying to write. My only view of the ceremony was through a bank of high-definition monitors that fed into the central server. Kendra swept in for her final microphone check an hour before the guests arrived. She looked breathtaking. I have to admit, the custom lace gown fit her like a second skin. A masterpiece of optical illusion designed to make her look both regal and accessible. But the illusion shattered the moment she opened her mouth. Her face was twisted in a snarl as she looked down at me. "You're wearing that?" she hissed, gesturing to my black slacks and button-down shirt. "I told you to wear the gray staff uniform. You look like a funeral director." "It's the standard technical crew attire." "Kendra," I said, my fingers never stopping their dance across the keyboard. "I'm supposed to be invisible. Remember, black blends into the shadows better. Just make sure you stay there," she snapped, checking her reflection in a monitor. "If I see you in a single drone shot, or if the translation lag is more than 2 seconds, I will personally throw your laptop in the pool. Do not ruin my optics. Audrey." She stormed out, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and toxic anxiety. I sat back in my folding chair. It was a hard, metal chair, cold against my spine, the kind you find in high school gymnasiums or interrogation rooms. And in that silence, looking at the empty seat next to me, where a maid of honor should have been sitting, the reality of my position finally crystallized. For years, I had interpreted their behavior as neglect. I thought they simply forgot about me because I wasn't shiny enough. But as I sat in that hidden booth, surrounded by the hum of servers and the blinking lights of the artificial intelligence translation matrix, I realized I had been wrong. This wasn't neglect. It was containment. It was the calculated architecture of a prison cell, built without bars. They didn't put me in this chair because they didn't care. They put me here because they needed to control exactly where I sat. It is the brutal economy of the spare chair. If you give someone a seat at the main table, you have to listen to them. You have to feed them. You have to acknowledge their humanity and their contribution. But if you assign them a folding chair in the dark, you turn them into a utility, a tool, a thing to be used when the main system fails and ignored when it functions. They hadn't just stolen my intellectual property, they had stolen my seat at the table of my own life. They convinced me that this chair was a kindness, a way to be included, when in reality, it was a leash. I had accepted the folding chair for a decade because I was terrified of standing outside in the cold. But the room was warm now. The servers were humming with heat. I leaned forward and typed a final string of code into the audio control console. The screen flashed green. System override. Accepted. Audio source rerouted. The trap was primed. I checked the time. 20 minutes until showtime. 20 minutes until the world saw exactly what happens when the utility decides to become the operator. The ceremony began with the precision of a military parade disguised as a fairy tale. The sun dipped low over the Atherton Hills, painting the estate in a soft, deceptive gold. From my dark booth, I watched the monitors as 300 guests turned their heads in unison. The music swelled, a live string quartet playing a piece I recognized because I had selected it for my own imaginary wedding years ago. Kendra walked down the aisle. She was a vision of purity and triumph, clutching a bouquet of white orchids like a scepter. Sterling waited at the altar. He looked different than usual, normally sharp and guarded. Today his expression was open, almost vulnerable. He watched Kendra approach with a look that twisted my gut. It wasn't just love, it was respect. He thought he was marrying his intellectual equal, the woman who wrote The Architecture of Tomorrow. He thought he was marrying the mind that challenged him, the soul that understood him. He didn't know he was marrying a mirror that only reflected what he wanted to see. The officiant spoke about truth and partnership. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. Metallic and bitter. My parents sat in the front row, dabbing their eyes. Cynthia looked victorious. Marshall looked relieved. They had pulled it off. The merger was happening. The asset was secured. Then, it was time for the vows. Kendra pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from her pocket. My notebook. I had spent 3 nights agonizing over those vows, pouring my own longing and belief in love onto the pages, crafting sentences that would make the world fall in love with her. She cleared her throat, flashed that famous, camera-ready smile, and began to read. "Sterling," she said, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "When I wrote about the future, I didn't know I was writing about you. You are the structural integrity to my wild design." The guests sighed. A drone buzzed closer to capture the tear rolling down her cheek. It was a perfect performance. She was stealing my soul in real time, broadcasting it to the world as her own. I looked at my laptop screen. The audio waveform from her microphone danced in blue spikes. Below it, the red line of the override file sat flat, waiting. My finger hovered over the execute key. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the fallout or the scandal or the ruined cake. I thought about my grandmother in that sterile room in Arizona. I thought about the NDA. I thought about 20 years of being the shadow. I pressed the key. At first, it was subtle, a digital stutter in the PA system. The beautiful French translation being pumped into the earpieces of the foreign dignitaries wavered. Then, the main speakers crackled. Kendra was still speaking about eternal foundations, but her voice on the speakers distorted. It deepened, warped, and then snapped into clarity. But it wasn't the voice of the blushing bride at the altar. It was the voice of the woman in the kitchen 3 weeks ago. God, do I really have to read this garbage? The voice boomed across the lawn, louder than the vows. Kendra froze. She tapped the microphone, confused. I promise to stand by you. The speakers roared over her. It's so boring. Structural integrity. Who talks like that? Just give me the bullet points so I can memorize them. Sterling won't know the difference. He's a golden retriever with a trust fund. As long as I look pretty and quote the book, he'll sign whatever check we need. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the vacuum before an explosion. Every head in the audience snapped toward the altar. Sterling took a half step back, his face going pale. Kendra looked around wildly, her eyes finding the camera drone, then the speakers, and finally, inevitably, the black tent in the back. The recording didn't stop. It dug deeper. The speakers, calibrated for perfect acoustic clarity to reach the back of the estate, broadcasted every sneer and giggle with high-definition cruelty. And the campaign donors, Kendra's recorded voice continued, echoing off the marble pillars. God, they're so desperate to believe in a young visionary. I just nod and use the buzzwords Audrey wrote down for me. Sustainable infrastructure, digital ethics. I don't even know what half of it means. They're sheep. Rich. Useful sheep. A collective gasp swept through the lawn like a sudden wind. I saw the Japanese investors, the ones my mother was so desperate to impress, remove their translation earpieces, staring at the stage with stone-faced horror. The foreign dignitaries exchanged glances. The political backers. The men and women who had poured millions into Kendra's brand. Looked like they had just swallowed glass. Kendra was trembling now. She looked small. The regal stature was gone, replaced by the posture of a caught thief. "Stop it," she screamed at the air. "Someone turn it off." The system was locked. I had built a recursive loop. So even if they cut the power, the backup batteries would keep the audio running for 5 more minutes. Then the final blow landed. Kendra's voice dropped into a casual whisper as she explained exactly who she thought she was. Audrey was the brain, she said, but not the face. The mule. Kendra was the racehorse. As long as Audrey stayed quiet and kept writing, Kendra would stay the star. The illusion didn't crack. It vanished. Cynthia reacted first. Feral and frantic. Spotting the recording booth behind the flowers, she screamed for Marshall to get me. He charged, red-faced with rage. I didn't run. I stood up, unzipped the tent, and stepped into the sunlight as 300 guests turned to stare. I fixed the audio, I said calmly when Marshall demanded answers. You wanted transparency for the investors. Kendra collapsed into tears, accusing me of ruining her life. I corrected her. I hadn't done anything. I had simply let her speak for herself, without me writing her words for once. That's when Marshall's lawyer tried to threaten me with the NDA. Cynthia claimed they owned me. I let them finish, then handed the lawyer an older document, the original ghostwriting agreement, the NDA. I explained. Didn't override existing IP rights. And Clause 17. B, the morals and reversion clause was very clear. Kendra had just admitted to fraudulent authorship on a live stream watched by millions. The rights reverted instantly. I didn't just own the book. I owned the movie rights, the merchandise, and the campaign's financial collateral. Cynthia realized it immediately. The loans were secured against future royalties. Without them, the campaign was bankrupt. Kendra begged Sterling to defend her. He didn't. He admitted he had known for years the writing wasn't hers. He had fallen in love with the mind behind the words, and that mind was mine. He ended the engagement on the spot and walked away. The fallout was quiet but devastating. The campaign collapsed. The recording went viral. Banks called in loans. My parents lost everything they had leveraged. Kendra vanished from public life. I thrived. The royalties came to me. I moved my grandmother into a proper care home. A year later, I stood on a new stage, presenting my own book this time, with my name on the cover. They had told me I was a shadow, But shadows only exist because there is light, and you cannot build a legacy on a lie. Sometimes, you don't need to burn the house down. You just take back the keys.